Thank you, Rick, for your outstanding keynote. Of course, we all know my favorite part of that speech, which was the beginning where everybody has to listen to me, but we'll pass that up. The Autry presents diverse stories from the West. Through our exhibitions, programs, and educational materials, we try to ensure that the diversity that is the Western experience is reflected in all we do. Today's seminar is no exception. Although topics can sometimes be challenging, we expect a respectful and civil dialogue as you learn from one another and share these experiences as a community. It's diversity of views that forces us to think and remain engaged. With that, I'd like to introduce our first session of the day. Today, there are more Native Americans working in museums than ever before. Native curators play a critical role in the interpretation and presentation of culture, and this session will explore how they balance the needs of community and museum priorities. Our first presenter is Patricia Norby, who is Purépecha, a member of the Purépecha Nation, who received her degree in American Studies at University of Minnesota and served as Assistant Professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Wisconsin. Her experience is vast, serving as the Director of the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies at the Newberry Library, and the Assistant Director at National Museum of the American Indian, New York. She is now the Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Please, let's welcome Patricia.
Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Marihamashak. Hello, everyone. I'm Patricia Marroquin Norby, Associate Curator of Native American Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I would like to first acknowledge that as a woman of Purépecha descent, I'm a guest here in this incredibly beautiful place, so thank you. I'm honored to be here with all of you today, and I would like to first thank Rick West for his wonderful keynote, and also thank my fellow panelists, Joe Horscapture, Ben Fitzsimmons, and the Autry Museum of the American West team for this opportunity and for all of their hard work with organizing this meaningful event. Each of us on this panel was offered a series of questions regarding our personal and professional experiences and how they influence the ways we navigate the museum world. We were also asked about our roles in the interpretation and presentation of culture and balancing those efforts with community needs. What I appreciated about these questions was that they demonstrated an awareness of and also respect for diverse approaches to foregrounding Native American and Indigenous experiences and protocols, while recognizing that this work simply cannot follow a one-size-fits-all process, even though many of us share very similar goals. In following with Rick's format of addressing the who and the what, I would say that my presentation will demonstrate the how this is unfolding at a 152-year-old institution that is often weighted by its prestige, but also is open to change, but is, again, weighted by its deeply ingrained institutional culture and memory. Today, I will share about my long-term scholarship and its relevance to my curatorial practice, which interestingly follows a very lively debate at breakfast about the gap between scholarly practice and its importance to curatorial approach. I will also share about current changes and upcoming exhibitions at the Met and how these important and timely changes include the Art of Native America, the Charles and Valerie Dyker Collection exhibition, which debuted in 2018 and is now officially a permanently rotating installation that includes historical through contemporary Native American works, as well as other projects at the Met that amplify Indigenous perspectives and are grounded by collaboration and relationship building with source communities. This approach has always been a priority in my long-term museum experience as a trained fine artist, in my museum leadership and fine art scholarship, and my curatorial practice. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I too am an alumni of NMAI, and that was where I first trained and met a number of my colleagues who are here today. And so I just want to acknowledge my own deep respect for NMAI as an institution and just really the ripple effect that NMAI has had over the years, not just for Indigenous museums, but also non-Indigenous spaces as well. So in going back to that gap, or addressing that gap between theory and practice and the how, I would like to share with you about my scholarly approach. So focusing on my work in Abiquiu, New Mexico, without the voices of Pueblo, Abiqueño, and Hispano communities of northern New Mexico, my current book project, Water, Bones, and Bombs, 20th Century American Art and Environmental Conflicts in the Southwest, would not be possible. And am I aiming this way or this way? Okay, thank you. Forthcoming through the University of Nebraska Press Money West series, the book draws directly from my dissertation, Visual Violence in the Land of Enchantment, which was published online in 2013 by the University of Minnesota and centers on 20th century American Indian and American art of northern New Mexico and its connections to issues of environmental justice. In my work, I examined the paintings of Tonita Pena, Georgia O'Keeffe, and Helen Hardin, three artists who lived and worked in the northern Rio Grande and Chama River valleys in northern New Mexico, and who had very distinct personal, professional, and aesthetic relationships with the land and landscapes of northern Rio Grande region. I investigate Tonita Pena's watercolor paintings and their material connections to 20th century water politics and agricultural practices. I also expose connections between the painter and printmaker Helen Hardin's studio practices and art material and environmental toxin exposure related to nuclear weapons production at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Finally, I argue that the American art icon Georgia O'Keeffe's landscape images visually manifest intercultural tensions and are more politically charged than modern art histories and O'Keeffe biographies portray. My research is grounded in over a decade of building collaborative relationships with local communities in northern New Mexico, as well as extensive research in American Indian law, New Mexican land grants, legal transcripts, local correspondence, and petitions to spotlight direct connections between O'Keeffe's landscapes and natural resource struggles. I underscore how 20th century American aesthetics, specifically in the West, elided American Indian and Hispano voices and their contributions to modern American art. Chapter 2 of my book centers on the ancient Tewa Pueblo Avishu, or Abiquiu, New Mexico, and local Abiqueño families and their perspectives of the American modern artist and American art icon Georgia O'Keeffe, who occupied their homelands for nearly 50 years. Abiquiu is located on the northern path of the historic Spanish Trail along the Rio Chama River, approximately 25 miles north of Santa Fe, and was a very active military and trading center during Spanish, Mexican, and U.S. occupational periods. In 1850, a Southern Ute agency was established at Abiquiu and served both Ute and Hickory Apache until 1882. In 1945, when the population of Abiquiu was around 600, the American painter Georgia O'Keeffe moved there permanently. Today, Abiqueños convey a sense of dignity when sharing about their own Indian and Hispano histories. Local families will tell you that their Genízaro ancestors lived and died in this desert long before O'Keeffe arrived. Abiqueño citizens identify as the descendants of the original Genízaro community, or children of Pueblo, Dehe, Apache, Ute, Pawnee, and Comanche captives and slaves who were purchased by Spanish and Mexican elite. Abiquiu was federally recognized as an Indian pueblo into the early 20th century when it gave up this status to become a village. Despite the long-term presence of Abiquiu's indigenous communities, American art historians and O'Keeffe fans have insistently referred to Abiquiu region as O'Keeffe country. The popular O'Keeffe myth of the isolated desert sage is a myth that has obscured Abikanyo contributions to O'Keeffe's success throughout the entire second half of her career. In fact, the artist was greatly dependent upon Native American and Hispanic communities in Abiquiu. There's no question that 20th century American art histories depended upon limited interpretations that both assign meaning to and dismiss specific historical, cultural, and racial information in promotion of American aesthetics and nationalist agendas. In Abiquiu, key to these messages was the visual conveyance of an empty land that was waiting for someone to just walk in and appreciate its beauty, its wonderful emptiness, and its natural aesthetics. These messages are not limited to O'Keeffe's landscapes. They play out every day in art and images and on tourist paraphernalia. This postcard, for example, which is circulated in local tourist shops in northern New Mexico, disseminates one of O'Keeffe's most famous and, I believe, most problematic quotes about Siping, Cerro Pedernal, or Paternal Mountain, a sacred natural landmark for northern New Mexico's indigenous communities. In 1977, to Newsday writer Amy Wallach, O'Keeffe made one of her most celebrated remarks. "It's my private mountain," she stated. "God told me if I painted it often enough, I could have it." The repeated dissemination of this statement in context with O'Keeffe's landscape paintings helped perpetuate Georgia O'Keeffe the myth of the isolated American art icon. Oops, I'm missing some images, apologies. And between 1936 and 58, O'Keeffe visually claimed to Chiping were documented in over 29 different paintings of the mountain, and so prevailing were the artist's verbal and visual claims to Chiping that between 1979 and 84, the National Park and U.S. Forest Services considered honoring the artist by renaming the mountain Chiping O'Keeffe Mountain. Local responses to the suggestion of renaming Cerro Pedernal were powerful. Abiquiu citizens protested by circulating a petition. Some wrote letters speaking out against this proposal, and others challenged the need of mostly Euro-American locals to immortalize the artist by renaming a natural landmark. More community members banded together to form Los Vinos de Cerro Pedernal, and statements from Los Vecinos affirmed their ancestral and spiritual connection to the mountain. And in their petition, they wrote, "Long, long time ago, Cerro Pedernal provided resources for us to survive. It gave us flint so that we could have tools. It also provided us with water and land so that we could farm. The canyon lands that surround its base offered us protection, but more importantly, it gave us a sanctuary, a place of refuge so that we could seek our own God." I share about my scholarship because indigenous voices and perspectives shaped my scholarly approach and have greatly impacted my curatorial vision, my commitment to Native American and indigenous sovereignty, and my goals of presenting Native American art and its kinship ties to local environments and indigenous homelands, values reflected in the American Wing's approach to presenting Native American art. Additionally, institution-wide and collaborative efforts at the Met are now underway across the museum. These efforts involve cross-departmental collaboration to appropriately highlight Native American perspectives and art while respecting culturally specific protocols, aesthetic expressions, and sovereignty. Important values that allow for the presentation of Native American art along an aesthetic continuum according to community perspectives while creating a welcoming space for indigenous visitors. So in May of 2021, the Met installed a land acknowledgement on the outside of the building, which is a bronze plaque. And this project started before my time, before my arrival, but I was there for the installation. And I know we all have mixed feelings about land acknowledgements, but I also recognize the importance of them in an institution like the Met as a critical first step in this process. However, I also believe that land acknowledgements need to be followed up by active work. So one of the ways that we have been following up is through curatorial practice. And in this slide is the opening foyer to Art of Native America in one of our American Wing galleries, Wolf North. And here you see two examples of contemporary work by two contemporary Native women artists, Jody Archambault and Marie Watt. This installation, this was installed during the pandemic, and what was important about this particular space was that we wanted to create an uplifting and vibrant space where people could come in and not feel weighted down by the history of the institution or the history of historical items on view, but to feel uplifted, to feel a sense of warmth, and to feel a sense of energy as they came in, specifically during the pandemic. Jody Archambault's Northern Traditional Dance Dress was created in 2005 and was acquired by the Met in 2019. The materials include over 115 pounds of beads, and it's powerful in both its practice of tradition as well as innovation that involve digital technology, but also many community hands, including family, friends, community members, and colleagues of the artist. Marie Watts' Dreamcatcher 2014, made from reclaimed wool and silk, which also involved over 40 community members to create, embodies themes of connection, dreams, warmth, community, belonging, and also celebrates the tradition of gifting blankets. When Marie talks about this work, she talks about how this particular piece embodies that initial, or one of the initial experiences that we share as human beings of being wrapped in a blanket following our birth. And it's one of our very first human experiences. Both works are on view in the current Art of Native America exhibition, which will rotate in June. But again, our goal was to create an uplifting space during what was a very dark time during the pandemic so that people could feel welcome as they came into Art of Native America. In addition to making changes to our curatorial approach in presenting Native American art, we also installed a in-gallery land and water statement. And now I want to be clear that this is not an acknowledgement. This is an active statement of how we will move forward working with Native American Indigenous communities. And I'd like to read a little bit from this statement. We affirm our intentions for ongoing relationships with contemporary Native American and Indigenous artists and the original communities whose ancestral and aesthetic items we care for. We understand that these items, vibrant expressions of Native sovereignty, identity, and connections to community and family, embody intergenerational and environmental knowledge, including origin stories, languages, songs, dances, and ties to homelands. We commit to pursuing continuous collaborations with Indigenous communities and present Native American art in a manner that is inclusive of Indigenous perspectives, involves guidance from source communities, and creates space for respectful listening and thoughtful dialogue. We will work to advance Indigenous experiences in the Met's exhibitions, collections, and programs. We will strengthen our awareness of historical and contemporary environmental issues in the New York region and throughout North America in order to thoughtfully reckon with our own institutional legacy and its impact on the lands and waters and original peoples of this place, which are and always will be inextricable. One current collaboration at the Met is the inclusion of multiple Indigenous designers in the Costume Institute's 2022 rotation of In America, a Lexicon of Fashion. This major exhibition coincides with the Costume Institute's 75th anniversary, as well as the annual Met Gala held in May. This fashion reappraisal represents American fashion as grounded by cultural and emotional resonances, as well as historical narratives. Included in this exhibition is this cascade ensemble constructed with Pendleton blankets styled after Hudson Bay Company's blankets by the Indigenous designer Karina Emmerich, who is Pele of descent. About this work, Emmerich states that her use of wool materials inspired by the Hudson Bay Company refers to environmental sustainability, as well as the company's historically contentious relationship to Indigenous communities and to her own ancestral history of working for the company during the family's history of working for the company during the 19th century. I'm also excited to share that the current rotation of A Lexicon of Fashion features 5 modern and contemporary Native American designers, including Jamie Okuma, Margaret Roach Wheeler, Frankie Welch, and Evan Ducharme. And additional designers will also be added very soon. Other partnerships across the Met include the Met's American Wing and our Modern and Contemporary Department, including exhibitions and ongoing acquisitions of modern through contemporary Native art. Recently installed in the modern and contemporary wing are two paintings by contemporary artist Jean Quick-to-See Smith and Kay Walking Stick. The paintings, August Encampment, created in 1988, use oil on canvas The paintings, August Encampment, created in 1988, using oil on canvas, and Genesis Violent Garden, created in 1981, with acrylic, wax, broken seashells, and metal on canvas, speak to family memories, connections to homelands, tribal politics, and creation stories, as well as settler encroachments, violence, and survival. The current installation of these powerful works by two prominent long-standing leaders of Native American art demonstrates active, stronger representation of contemporary Native American artists and Native American women at the Met. Recent exhibitions in the American Wing that involve collaborations with source communities, individual artists and community members, following their lead on how to best foreground Indigenous voices and experiences, included the Carl Bodmer North American Portraits on View from April 5th to July 25th, 2021, which was co-curated by Annika Johnson from the Jocelyn Art Museum and Thayer Tolles from the Met. And I just want to acknowledge that Joe was part of that project and wrote one of the labels and honoring his family members for a specific Bodmer portrait. Also, Jules Tavernier in the Ilem Pomo on View August 16th to November 28th, 2021, co-curated by Betsy Kornhauser and Shannon Vittoria, also included collaboration with numerous members of the Ilem Pomo community. Each project included numerous community members as co-curators, advisors, consultants, and contributing authors, and presented 19th century paintings in context with intergenerational histories, personal lives, and family legacies of contemporary Native American communities and families who hold direct ties to the featured artworks and individuals depicted in these images. I'm thrilled to share about two new acquisitions that will soon be featured in the American Wing's Wolf North Gallery in the upcoming exhibition Water Memories, which opens June 23rd. The exhibition presents intimate connections with and memories of water. Water Memories flows as a current of stories and moments that contemplate the impact of water's presence and absence upon our daily lives. New acquisitions featured in Water Memories are Southern Chemehuevi artist Cara Romero's archival photograph, Water Memory, seen here, which is the signature image and title inspiration for this exhibition and is a promised gift from a private collection. Our second acquisition is by the Ho-Chunk artist Truman Lowe. This elegant 1993 sculpture, Feather Canoe, made of willow, copper, and feathers, portrays water as a place of sanctuary, emergence, and regeneration. In his 2004 biography, Woodlands Reflections, written by art historian Joe Ortel, the artist stated he wanted to create a canoe that conveyed a feeling of gliding on water, a sensation he had experienced while floating along the rivers in Wisconsin. The result is a lightweight, minimalist vessel that speaks to connections between water and sky. Both acquisitions embody urgent environmental challenges currently faced by numerous Indigenous communities to protect shrinking homelands and freshwater sources. The quiet potency of both artworks intentionally draw in viewers to pause, look closely, and to reflect upon contextual, cultural, and personal meanings of water. In Water Memories, Lowe's Feather Canoe is placed in dialogue with this 19th century cyanotypes of the German-American photographer Henry Bosse, hired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers between 1883 and 1893. Bosse created over 345 cyanotypes of the upper Mississippi River prior to major alterations of the river that included dams, levees, and other flood control measures. In his decade-long visual study, Bosse inadvertently documented the ancestral homelands and waters of both Ho-Chunk and Dakota peoples. Another highlight of the Water Memories exhibition is the 17-foot wide, 6-foot high triptych created by Luisenio and German-American artist Fritz Scholder. Most well known for his Indian portrait series from the mid-20th century, Possession on the Beach, 1989, is one of few works by the artist that depicts water. I'm excited to share that this will be the first time that Fritz Scholder is being shown at the Met. In Conversation with Possession on the Beach is another important work by contemporary Shinnecock artist Courtney Leonard. Her work looks into history of scrimshaw, Northeastern Indigenous communities' ceramic practices, and the sacredness of whales to the Shinnecock Nation during the 2020 pandemic. Another work that will be included in the Art of Native America installation is this work, but also by Courtney Leonard, entitled Contact 2021, which includes over 2021 hand-created shells that she hand-painted and also fired, and then tied individually with sinew onto canvas. Many of the shells include personal imagery as well as community imagery and other meaningful images. Also included in water are historical items from the Met's collection, including these items from the Ho-Chunk community, which were written about by Janice Rice. And I was excited that another Ho-Chunk, or two Ho-Chunk members are here today. And Janice was a very important voice in this exhibition and helping to guide selection and curation of a number of items in the exhibition. Another upcoming exhibition at the Met is Grounded in Clay. And this exhibition is completely curated by community members. Over 60 Pueblo community members curated over 100 historical through ancestral through contemporary works in clay. And it is the first community-curated Native American exhibition at the Met. Pueblo community members curated over 100 historically significant works, contributed to in-gallery labels and the exhibition catalog. This exhibition foregrounds voices and perspectives of over 60 Pueblo community members from 19 Rio Grande Pueblos, Isleta del Sur, and Hopi communities. Co-curators include professionals from the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Vilcek Foundation, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. At the Met, efforts to foreground Indigenous voices reach beyond gallery spaces. Currently, the museum has hosted virtual source community visits to our collections to help build positive collaborative relationships with sovereign nations and to discuss culturally sensitive and NAGPRA-relevant issues. Soon, we will be hosting in-person community consultations, and I'm very much looking forward to this. I see these important visits as an opportunity to grow and to learn and to support Native American Indigenous peoples and their perspectives. Building trust with Native American and Indigenous communities is at the heart of this work. Listening to community needs, respecting protocol for best care of the collection is of the highest priority and in what I do on a daily basis. Also ongoing are educational and public programs featuring Native American artists, scholars, and community experts that highlight current issues in Indian country. And I'm excited to share that our new Art of Native America audio guide, created in collaboration with the Met's digital team, includes voices from community members, artists, and Indigenous celebrities, and also features the award-winning Cree and Métis actor of film and television, Tantu Cardinal, as narrator. I'm proud to say that at the Met, there has been much change and growth. I also recognize that we have a long way to go. But I'm a strong believer that effective and long-lasting change takes time. And my time at the Met began during the height of the COVID pandemic. My initial year, which was largely virtual, provided me the opportunity to assess the specific needs of the institution and to begin developing institution-wide guidelines for issues regarding NAGPRA, collections, care, and exhibition protocol relevant to the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990. These important measures help my colleagues and I in our ongoing efforts to provide a welcoming collaborative space for Native American Indigenous communities and for building long-term partnerships. Developing new policies and implementing culturally sensitive protocols at a colonial institution where these practices are very new can bring out many challenges, but they also encourage potential for new relationships. Indigenous art and creative practices have always offered diverse and innovative ways of knowing and understanding the world, unique expressions that are visually and materially realized in established aesthetic systems and community protocols. Creative production and aesthetics are deeply rooted in the places and regions to which Native American and Indigenous people and communities belong. into all that is good about who we are as Indigenous peoples. This is one way we connect to our histories and to one another. The ongoing daily work of Native American art collections remind us that these works carry the hopes and visions of our ancestors, but also that we must engage in ongoing dialogue, cross-cultural collaborations, and continual recentering of our self-determinations and creative practices. We must also question internalized settler colonial limitations, borders, and boundaries about who we are and how we want to move forward collectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really great to see so many great things are happening at the Met.